Hello. Well, I'm going to start this programme in an unusual fashion with two snippets of some popular music. I know one of them is completely inappropriate for this time of year, but well, hey ho. Now let's listen to this, and I have to find the appropriate bit of this, so bear with me, please. And that's enough of that. Well, Greg Lake wrote the first song, the very popular Christmas ditty, in 1997, and the second piece by Sting was called Russians and was written in 1985. And I think by now you'll get the relevance to this programme. Pop music has a long history, a long track record, I suppose we could say, of filching tunes from classical works, and these were two pretty good examples. The song I Believe in Father Christmas features an instrumental riff that comes from the Troika movement, from a piece of classical music that's very well known indeed, Sergei Prokofiev's Lieutenant Kije Suite. And Sting's song Russians uses the romance theme from Lieutenant Kije. However, though the Lieutenant Kije Suite may be well known, I suspect the story of both Lieutenant Kije and of the music it inspired is less well known, hence this programme. So in this programme you're going to hear all 5 movements of the suite, which I think is something of a tour de force by Prokofiev, and some background to the music, which has really become one of the most popular pieces of 20th century classical music. First though, just who was Lieutenant Kije? Well, he didn't exist at all. In 1927, a Russian novelist called Yuri Tenyanov wrote the story of Lieutenant Kije as a screenplay for a film which ultimately was never made. A year later, he recast the script into a novella, and a couple of years after that, plans were announced to have another bash at the film. This was really at the very earliest days of Soviet filmmaking, and the quality of the film Lieutenant Kije, which was premiered in the Soviet Union in 1934 and later released in London under the title The Tsar Wants to Sleep, reflects that. I've watched it with subtitles, and I can tell you it's scratchy, it's kind of amateurish, and it's really truly hammy. So what of the story? Well, it's a comical satire. It's completely absurd, but nonetheless I found it quite amusing. So we're in the Russian imperial palace. The Tsar, Paul I, is sleeping, while 2 of his courtiers are engaged in, let's call it, some hanky-panky, during which one of them, a lady in waiting, lets out a shriek, which sounds something like the word guard, and which startles the Tsar. It wakes him up, and the Tsar is not a man to mess around with. He has a violent temper, he's got a reputation for vexatious and petty regulations, and an absolute obsession with obedience. He demands to know who it was that woke him up. Meanwhile, a court clerk is elsewhere in the palace, busy making up a roster for the guards. And with a slip of the pen, he accidentally includes the name of an officer who doesn't exist, Lieutenant Kije. It was an error on his part. And when the Tsar, who liked to know about these things, inspects the list, he's intrigued by the name and he asks that he meets Lieutenant Kije. The court officials are really too frightened to tell him that Lieutenant Kije doesn't exist, and then they realise that they could use him to Lieutenant Kije to get them off the hook, and so they tell the Tsar that it was Lieutenant Kije who woke him up. And so the Tsar orders that Lieutenant Kije be flogged and exiled to Siberia. And that begins a ridiculous chain of events. An invisible person is flogged and the invisible person is sent packing. To the Tsar's credit, I suppose, when the real culprit confesses, the Tsar orders that Lieutenant Kije be returned to the palace immediately and be promoted to the rank of colonel. The courtier's pretense has to continue. And so Lieutenant Kije supposedly marries a princess, and the Tsar grants him land and money and makes him a general and commander of the army. In time, the Tsar realises that, wait a minute, I've not actually met this Lieutenant Kije. So he tells his courtiers that he wants to do so. Quick thinking officials come up with a story that Lieutenant Kije's died, and so a very lavish funeral with full military honours is held for a man who doesn't exist. Being a Tsar, being tight-fisted, the Tsar demands that the money he gave Kije be returned. But he's told by the court officials that Kije spent a lot on high living. In fact, they stole the money. The Tsar denounces Kije as a thief, and he posthumously demotes him from the rank of whatever it was, general, to private. I think it's time for some music now, so let's hear the first movement of the Lieutenant Kije suite. It's called The Birth of Kije, and you'll hear it beginning with a distant cornet fanfare, something like a bugle reveille, a dawn call, if you like, from the army barracks. There's a series of mournful arpeggios, and they signal his birth, and at the very end of the suite, they signal his death. So there's a lot going on in the first few bars. After this cornet call, you'll hear a duet between drum and piccolo, and but I'll let you hear it all. There's a wee bit in here where there's something a wee bit plaintive about it. It's like Prokofiev is asking, who is this mystery man? So let's hear now the first movement of the Lieutenant Kije suite, just as soon as I can find it. After the Russian Revolution, Prokofiev decided to try his hand in the United States until the turmoil in the newly created Soviet Union was over. And when he returned to Russia, largely because of homelessness, I suppose, he was anxious to start work on music with a Soviet theme, and in 1932 he was asked to write music for the film Lieutenant Kije. Prokofiev was by no means an obvious choice for this commission. By this time he was better known abroad than in his own country. He'd never written music for film, and he was generally seen as a composer of dissonant music, which wasn't exactly flavour of the month in the Soviet Union at that time. He declined the offer at first, but he changed his mind. He saw this as an opportunity to produce something for a mass Soviet audience. As a film, Lieutenant Kije was seen as perfect propaganda by the Soviet authorities. It was, as someone wrote, a satire on the stupidity of royalty and the particularly Russian terror of displeasing one's superior. Let's hear the second movement now. One thing that distinguishes this movement is Prokofiev's use of the saxophone. Prokofiev had attended the premiere of Ravel's Bolero, which used this instrument, and he was impressed. The movement's called simply Romance, and it's based on a poem, The Little Grey Dove is Cooing. The theme of this song is developed using an arrangement of instruments before a second theme using the tenor sax enters the fray. And as the movement ends, the Little Grey Dove theme returns with appropriate birdsong. This is a kind of discourse on love, and depicting the point in the film when love enters the life of the non-existent Lieutenant Kije. In texture, it's classic Russian folk music. Let's hear it. Prokofiev took the job of writing music for Lieutenant Kije very seriously. He wrote, I somehow had no doubts whatsoever about the musical language for the film. What's important to me is the era, the internal meaning of each event, the personality of each hero. And they told the producers not to expect a mere musical illustration, if you like, as a background to the film. He saw the music as embodying the characters and the theme of the film, and it combined bits of comedy and tragedy and romance and sadness. He definitely wanted the suite to appeal to Soviet audiences who perhaps were hearing concert music for the first time. He wrote in an article in Izvestia in 1934, above all, it must be melodious. Moreover, the melody must be simple and comprehensible without being repetitive or trivial. So, after the romance comes a big day, Kije's wedding. The movement gets off to a grand start with a big orchestral outburst that's followed by a ceremonial melody, primarily with solo cornet and wind instruments. It's all a tad bumptious, I suppose, but the cornet somehow manages to keep it a bit cheery. Allegro fastoso is what Prokofiev wanted. Fast and pompous. Pomposity is the big thing about Lieutenant Kije as a film. There are comic references to Lieutenant Kije's non-existence throughout the film. He's described in it as a secret figure without form. And at his wedding, for example, the priest holds a crown, which is a traditional marriage symbol in Russia, in Russian Orthodox ceremonies, over the absent head of the absent groom. And there's another scene in which Lieutenant Kije's empty boots are seen under a chair, drawing attention to his missing feet and legs. Anyway, let's hear Kije's wedding. something quite curious about the music for the film. It was scored for a small chamber orchestra, and it occupies only roughly 15 minutes of the film. And if you watch the film, as I've done, you'll notice that the music is pretty fragmentary and it's actually largely inaudible. Prokofiev wrote the film music quite quickly, but when it came to putting together the Lieutenant Kije suite, well, that was a different story. He said it was a devilish job, and he added, "It gave me much more trouble than the music for the film itself." As I said earlier, he set himself the task of writing a suite that would appeal to Soviet audiences new to classical music, and that's certainly the case with the next and without doubt the best known part of the suite, the fourth movement, called Troika. You know what a troika is. It's a Russian three-horse sled you might expect to see in the wide open snowy landscapes of the Russian steppes. The music in this movement depicts the non-existent Lieutenant Kije's return from Siberia, and it's based on an old cavalry song. And I suppose, like any sled journey, it starts off slowly but quickly gains pace. The saxophone and the bassoon play a jaunty little rhythm, and listen out for the piccolo, which I suppose might be taking for the sparkle of snow. So let's hear Troika. I think I may have said earlier that the director of the film, Lieutenant Kije, hadn't considered Prokofiev as his first choice to write the music, but Prokofiev convinced him that he was changing his musical tastes in favour of something which he called new simplicity, music that was, well, simpler and more relaxed, and certainly more in keeping with the requirements of the new regime in the Soviet Union. The funny thing about it is that Prokofiev wrote the music blind. He was in Paris when he composed it, and he never saw the film when he was doing so. He had to rely on written descriptions of the scenes, and I think it's really hard to imagine a film score being written in that way these days. Prokofiev even posted the score in instalments from Paris to, well, I suppose we should call it Leningrad at this time. However, though he never saw the film, he was fascinated by the story. Its surreal nature really did chime with Prokofiev's own somewhat sardonic sense of humour. As for the suite, well, the original plan was that it should be written for radio, but Prokofiev thought he could write something that would work as a concert piece. And so the premiere of the suite, which Prokofiev himself conducted, was a big hit, and it opened the door for more similar commissions for Prokofiev. As for the film itself, well, it opened in no fewer than half a dozen Moscow cinemas on the first night. I said earlier that I thought the entire suite was something of a tour de force. Well, I think that is particularly true of the last movement, which brings together the various themes featured in the previous movements. Each theme has a quite different characteristic, yet somehow Prokofiev manages to make the entire movement work. So let's hear the final movement, which actually depicts the burial of the unfortunate and imaginary Lieutenant Kije. I think it's a fine movement. It's quite introspective in nature, with all these various motifs coming together. So you're going to hear the opening cornet fanfare, the Little Grey Dove tune from the second movement, mixed up with the wedding music, and at the end a touching farewell in the form of a distant rendition of the fanfare. Let's hear it. By the way, I've been using in this programme a 1999 recording by the London Symphony Orchestra, conducted by André Previn. Here then is the final movement. a bit like trying to complete a jigsaw puzzle with pieces from different jigsaws. Well, that concludes the story of Lieutenant Kije, and if you would like to see the film, and well, I enjoyed the film, so you may like to see it too, simply click on the underlined words Lieutenant Kije in the document I sent you. The Lieutenant Kije suite isn't particularly long, excuse me, so you haven't heard a great deal of music in this programme, so I thought I would finish the programme with some more bits of film music by Prokofiev, and you'll get those in video number 2. Thank you.